so one of the things that Ann and I, the way that we think of it is, we're calling it for the holidays, and certainly it is heightened during this time because, as somebody already said, the increased contact with family, especially when there's been distance and then coming back together. But especially these days we just had it in our own home, related to that if you're not holding the line one way, that, what I mean? There's these forced choices that are happening that does feel a little different than has happened before. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, actually, APA even says it, like right now, there's more divisiveness around than we've seen probably back since the Civil War. And they're talking research oriented. They're not just speculating. So one of the things we wanted to jump on is really talk about that. Somebody before we got started was speaking about, Maggie, you were speaking about working with college students, and college students coming home, back home. And they have all of this wealth of knowledge under their belt. We have those on our end, and they come home with that wealth of knowledge, and it's wonderful, but it's also challenging because
they know all about Palestine and they are experts and know, and so it's really hard, to
having those really so the core is like, how do you have, and we want to also kind of continue to make it a conversation as we go along, but we want to talk about how do you have these conversations with people that have sharply contrasting views, or maybe you have similar views, but as you start to talking about it, it starts to feel more splintered off and more divisive and more powerfully activating. And this is harder than I thought because I want to have y'all speak instead of, but I do love seeing our faces. We usually do this as a Facebook Live thing and we don't get to see anybody's faces. So we're very excited to see y'all out there.
That's right. And so the general idea is, we talk a lot about secure relating, and the notion being, how do you hold your own when there's turmoil around you? And even like right now, being able to feel inside your body, like, how do you know when you're activated, and how do you feel your heart? I think of it like, if I can feel the back of my spine versus kind of leaning forward, or like being activated, or speaking pressured, or disconnecting, being disinterested, that there's a certain physical feeling when I'm in that balanced ventral vagal space, where that I have my thinking, I have my heart, I'm able to be connected to myself, and I'm able to be connected to the other person. So in that example a moment ago about the Middle East, I don't know that I did a great job, but one of the things I was trying to do was just hold that I wasn't going to take a position one way or the other. What I did know is that I was uncertain, and I wasn't going to be forced to be certain about anything because I didn't know. And the pressure to take a side was, I could feel myself wanting to jump and either argue or comply to stay connected. And that was a sign to me of my own activation and their activation. So again, I'm not saying, I'm not a model of having this down perfect by any stretch. But I think that just using that as an example of, like, when we talk about secure relating, and the way that we describe it is, it's a verb. This isn't secure attachment. It's not the same thing as secure attachment. We can have an absolute, what they call, we don't like to use even the term insecure attachment. We see that as pathological, like it has a pathological overtone, that these are adaptations that worked. And so, but what we mean by secure relating is, it's a verb, it's an action, and that anybody, no matter your history, can learn to find that middle balanced regulatory state. It's a state of mind. It's not a category. So even people that with a secure attachment, I'm going to pass this off to you in just a second here. So that even people that happen to be securely attached, which we always say, you know, we think of that as like Bigfoot. It's like, it actually does exist that people really do have secure attachments. But even people that have secure attachment aren't necessarily always securely relating. And then people who don't have secure attachment can securely relate. And so we really want to distinguish those ideas. And so secure relating would be kind of like, did you want to describe it a little bit how you feel it?
I think secure relating, I love the way you were describing getting in touch with your body, but the goal being, secure relating involves 2 or more people. And it doesn't mean you have to be present with 2 or more people, but it means like being able to find your own body center, but not forget the other person. And I plenty times, sometimes in the middle of a holiday dinner or a group event with certain individuals, including our, now 20-year-old kids, can really feel myself like 21, feel yourself like your entire body activating and pushing forward. And then I lose connection to what I'm doing. Why am I having this conversation? And I lose connection to the other person in the conversation. I think that is really easy to have happen to any of us, but in particular around large family gatherings when we haven't actually been seeing each other all the time, or we have so much in common in some ways and so different in others. And so to securely relate means is to hold your own, holding yourself, and being able to stay connected to others. So some of the ways when we think about having a divisive conversation that can be challenging is, do you have the conversation at all? Is it something that you go home and we're going to stay away from religion? We're going to stay away from politics. We're going to stay away anything that's activated. For some families, that's probably a great idea, right? But for many of us, we want to have engaging conversations. We want to feel more connected to the people. And we want to not be in fear that if a certain topic comes up, and I don't know about you guys, but sometimes you can have a topic come up and everybody's body in the room starts to get tense. Does anybody relate to that around their own, any table? It doesn't have to be a holiday table.
Right. And I was thinking it might also be helpful. A couple of things is to use the chat so that we can kind of hear what is going on in your mind, but also because we're not trying to put ourselves out there, is that we've got it figured out and we're telling you that if things come to your mind, either things that you associate to as we're talking or examples that you have of what it means to you to hold your own, or what it means to you to securely relate, or things that you have found that has been helpful to you, then feel free to unmute and let's kind of have this be a little bit more of a discussion so that you're not just passively listening to us, because again, that's not necessarily securely relating either, right? I know that we have a lot of intelligence in this frame. I know that we do. And we're interested in cultivating that.
No, I was just going to say, feel free when we said to just put your hand up and unmute and jump in.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one that I was thinking about was just the notion of, so I don't know, did anybody hear the one with Loretta Ross, the episode with Loretta Ross by chance?
This is not a challenge.
Yeah, right. We're going to start quizzing you.
The title of it was calling in the call out culture.
Yeah. She's this wonderful woman who is the civil rights activist. And one of the things that she talked about was, when you have the racist uncle, that starts saying the things that is embarrassing everybody at the table, how that you engage them she talks about using shame as a last resort. And so that rather than feeling compelled to explain everything to them right in that moment and to fix the problem right there, that's kind of the calling out, or canceling them because they said the wrong thing or used the wrong pronoun or whatever, right? That you would instead you would engage them. Like, Uncle Bob, her example was something like, Uncle Bob, if there was a burning building, you wouldn't be asking anybody. I'm making this up. This isn't exactly what she said, but it's the gist. You wouldn't be asking somebody their pronouns. You would throw them over their shoulder and you would run them out and you would save their life. You would be the first person to stand up you wouldn't be looking at what color they are. You would take care of them. I know your moral center and you wouldn't
Mhm.
hurt someone. I know you wouldn't do that on purpose. So when you say these things, it doesn't match kind of who I know you are. So it's this sort of way of holding someone, yet also calling, she calls it calling them in versus calling them out. So I thought that was a really lovely example of that both and. So she's holding on to herself and saying something, but at the same time, kind of I'm doing this, like her arms wrapped around the other person. It's like, you're still a dignified person. And that's one of the things, another principle, by the way, in our book that is now available, which we are so super excited about. But one of the principles in the secure relating idea is that there has to be mutuality. It can't be that, I'm securely relating and I feel really happy, but you're disconnected. And I'm talking at you. Well, that's not connection. And so that's part of the holding your own is it's the both and, basically. It's the both and.
Asking yourself 2 questions when you're getting into these conversations. What's the motivation and what's your goal, right? Like, it's hard to know that, but if you check your motivation for the conversation, it can really highlight a lot about how engaging you want to be. Is your motivation just to get through it? And sometimes that's what it is. It could be, can we just use an Uncle Bob as just we're gonna just toss out Uncle Bob. Everybody has some kind of Uncle Bob, I guess. I don't know.
Or maybe it should be Aunt Susan.
Or Aunt Suze or Aunt Ann.
Yeah.
I'm sure in my family there's some Aunt Ann dialogues, but it's so easy sometimes to discount Uncle Bob and just think, I just want to tolerate you and get through. And sometimes, depending on how connecting or disconnecting Uncle Bob is, that may be all you want to do is your escape plan. And I love that, Erin, okay, I'm going to engage, I'm going to try. But if you get a sense that the motivation of Uncle Bob is to not actually have a conversation, and there's times you can tell that, right? You can tell, is this person engaging me in a conversation, or are they inciting us, right? And sometimes that's hard to know what the motivation is. But what we encourage you to do is, what is your motivation, right, in the conversation? And what is your goal? Because if maybe your motivation is to just have a good holiday, maybe your motivation could be shifted and your goal could be, maybe I want to know Uncle Bob just a little bit deeper. This is somebody I see. And can I risk tolerating what Sue was pointing out, all that activation of my body, and soothing it so I can sit here in a conversation with somebody that I probably wouldn't do happy hour with, right? Like, sometimes we have Uncle Bobs or people in our family. That's not the person we're going to choose to socialize and have these kind of conversations. That doesn't mean this conversation isn't important, right? And it can be important on different levels. Sometimes it's important because I want to have a connection with Uncle Bob because he's now 85 years old. I may never see the man. Maybe he has my history.
Right.
So what's your motivation? What's your goal? And I'd encourage us to think of the goal also being, Sue talked about secure relating being a verb and something we actively do. It's also kind of this active destination that you never get there and you live there. But can you have a really related conversation in that one moment and really be part of making that happen? And it may be that we have to really practice all these things. Like, if we're going to teach Uncle Bob that his points are way off,
right,
and we could feel that pressure, which I've definitely been known to do, that we probably aren't secure relating with ourselves. And then we're going to unconsciously send mirror neurons to Uncle Bob, who's now going to tell me how wrong I am, because now we've challenged each other. So our focus on secure relating is trying to send a message. And our belief is that we need to do this not just around the family table. We have to do this to bring the divisiveness that we see in our culture exponentially going up. If we don't have this practice inside of ourselves and we see Uncle Bob as actually valuable and relevant rather than an eye roll or somebody to tolerate, because when somebody feels tolerated, now that of course doesn't mean if Uncle Bob isn't sending the message that he wants to shame and dominate you, that you don't need to just exit and go to the bathroom, because that conversation is not worth it.
Right. And also with secure relating, it's if we're not safe, like the way, like to be, if it's worth it, right?
Mhm.
To be able to listen to Uncle Bob, to really be able to listen compassionately and understand, because he has a context too. We talk a lot about context. And there's a reason that Uncle Bob is thinking the way that he's thinking. Even, for example, patriarchy, like it's not Uncle Bob, it's the system that Uncle Bob grew up in. And it's the things that Uncle Bob has internalized. And there's a lot around that. So again, it's not like if we're able to hold it, which is a question,
Mhm.
but if we are able to hold it and really listen, one, that makes Uncle Bob feel safer to be impacted by us. But also, it's like we really actually might get something that he's holding that is actually really important. And by us getting it, it is going to make it safer. There's a hand up, I think.
Yeah, actually, I love what you just said. And that is like, if we think about it as a relationship, each interaction is a relationship rather than thinking about the issue.
Yeah.
Right. So you're holding an issue, but you're holding a relationship. And if we get so focused on the issue, we lose the relationship, then what's the purpose of that conversation? And so if you're able to hold the relationship in mind and ask somebody, well, what makes you feel that way? Where did that come from? And we always know my telltale sign when I'm getting out of secure relating is when I'm waiting my turn for the jump in, like I can feel myself, wanting to interrupt or ready to jump in. That is for me. And it's so important for us to know what our telltale signs are. When we talk about, Sue was mentioning that we don't want to classify anybody as you are always dismissingly attached or preoccupied attached. We're fluid, right? Like we do, though, however, use typically more primarily not one mode, but we tend to favor different ways of engaging. We trend. We might trend more preoccupied, a little what we call in the podcast red, or you may trend more blue.
Oh, you know what I actually think is we trend with different people.
Yes.
Right. That like we can, depending on the relationship, we trend in a particular place. But this is research from the world of polyamory, that you can trend in the different relationships. Same person can be preoccupied,
in one relationship,
trend preoccupied in one relationship, and trend blue in another direction, trend secure in another direction, so but I'm curious, what do you guys find, like how do you, like, is this something that you're monitoring? Do you notice? And what are kind of some of your tells when you begin to move out of and again, I'm not assuming everybody is totally familiar with this, but like when we call the green zone, we mean that our ventral vagal, our secure relating, our oxytocin enriched, basically the green zone is what we call it, which is the connected, powerful and bold, Chris and Neff, fierce self-compassion, fierce other compassion. It's not nice. It's not just nice. It's power. It's a powerful, empowered place. So what are some of y'all's tells when you're like, well, one, how do you know you're there? And how do you know when you begin to exit that zone?
One of the things, I mean, I can really relate to that struggle. And sometimes those questions can feel judgmental. Like they're not just curiosity. You can tell whether a question is coming from a pure open curiosity. And one is, are you kind of meeting that standard that I'm hoping you're meeting? And so I do love when we can remind ourselves, okay, what would my best green self feel, and take care of myself in that moment? And that way you don't always, you have to remember, you can go, wait, I want it to be a two-way conversation, right? And so it's kind of like bringing it back to yourself, and you can answer a question. So, that's probably all I want to answer about that. And now what about you? Like it's a freedom to kind of go here, where am I? And what about you? Where you don't have to land only in the defensive getaway unless you just really need to, because sometimes we just need to. But it is like that's one reason why we really like to remind ourselves, okay, where would my green self land? Where would my more secure self land? It's like, I really have to answer these questions to a place and to a group if I don't really want to. And sometimes that simple reminder can be, oh, wait, I have a choice.
And my thought too is like, it's the threat part, right?
Yeah.
Like, because sometimes we really do need to set, like you're saying, that there is going to be a boundary there, because there should be or needs to be, but because we can still be in green and set the boundary.
Yeah.
But where the dysregulation is more the threat. So I'm not directing this, here, but the dysregulation is where we're actually feeling a little feeling of threat.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what you're saying is, like, by calling up, like, what's actually threatening. And that can also sometimes bring us back in. It's like, there's not really like, what's going to actually happen if I disappoint them, or don't answer, or give them the wrong, or whatever,
don't meet their standards,
or just whatever, don't do my song and dance that I know that they want me to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the actual, like, asking yourself, what's the actual threat? So that there's, in a sense, what you're doing is you're using your PFC, your prefrontal cortex, with those questions, and you're talking to your limbic system, and then you're sort of letting your limbic system answer, or you're making your limbic system, which your limbic system doesn't really have words. It's just it's just saying, hey, I'm worried, I'm nervous. It's just chemically sending signals. So by forming the words of what the threat actually is, there's the Dan Siegel's Name It to Tame It. You're symbolizing the chemicals, which in and of itself is going to be able to help you regulate.
Yeah, one of the thoughts, again, kind of coming back to college students, one of the things when we say, let's remember the humanness, like why they're asking these questions, and when we say, what's the goals, what's going on for that person, I think one of the intense divisiveness that's happening right now is there's a hell of a lot of shame going along inside of us, guilt in between us, and we don't know how to handle it. So we tend to, I kind of describe it sometimes in couples therapy, when we have a gross feeling inside, we kind of throw it up on the other person, and then we feel a lot better. And then they're like going, what the hell just happened? Do you know what I mean? And so sometimes, like if we go to college students, for one, like the young kids that have a lot more awareness than we had when we were their age, there's a lot of age difference, so I'll just use us. I didn't have half the awareness of the world, a quarter of it, than these college students have, that they're coming home. They have an abundance, and depending on where they come from and their background, they have a lot of underlying shame or challenge inside themselves. They don't know what to even recognize or what to do with it. And I think that even happens for Uncle Bob. So we think of Uncle Bob, who may have been in a time period where men pretty much could be the leaders and in charge and never challenged, and they kind of live in that. Now they hear all sorts of other stuff going on that's challenged their internal sense of who they are, and they likely have a little bit of shame that they're dealing with, but they may not be aware of it. And so I think sometimes us being aware of that in conversations, when we say, what's the motivation or the goal, is to remember that that other person is carrying that too.
You mean you're talking about being aware of their shame?
Yeah,
they're being aware of their shame that they don't know they have.
Yes. And I don't know if y'all can relate to it when we were teasing about sometimes the adolescents. I mean, kind of asking you questions in a way that says, I can't believe, like anybody that's kind of talking to you in a way that says, I can't believe that you would say blah, blah, blah.
Or like how we recycle wrong.
Okay. It's true. We do. We don't clean it out enough. But like y'all can probably really relate to sometimes hearing, how could you say that? How could you support A and not B? How could you believe that? And when you can start, what I would suggest in a secure relating position, if you were to try to maintain it, because when somebody does, how could you dare? How could you? It evokes stuff inside you, right? It does for me, right? If I think I am unaware and I'm supporting a side that is like hurting somebody else or whatever, it evokes something in me. And if I'm not aware of that, I'm much more likely to strike out And now I'm in this controversial conversation with my sibling or with my child, but it's because I got shame evoked. And possibly one reason I'm getting shame evoked is that person is feeling it. They don't want to feel it. So they come out in a self-righteous position. Almost always when somebody's in a self-righteous position, it's because they're scared to death about what's going on inside of them.
Mhm.
And so it's an interesting thing when we get back to asking questions. And instead of just getting evoked and you go, what makes you feel that way? Why is that so important to you? It makes that person go a little bit more self-exploratory. And then maybe they can get to talking about why that's so important. But now I'm not necessarily receiving their shame. And I'm not sure if that makes sense when I'm saying that it's really easy to receive their shame. But if they're unaware that they're having their own privilege guilt, or they're having any of those numbers of feelings, and they're now bringing it into our relationship, because if now we feel a little lower than them unconsciously, they feel a little bit better. They don't do that intentionally. They really don't. So staying in the relationship's important.
When we are leaning red, the idea of containment is a way of moving back to green. And when we are leaning blue, it's like the uncontainment. It's like saying more and moving towards is a movement back towards green. Now,
but I was just going to say something but I really like what you're saying, but choosing to disengage from the conversation, that you have perfect empowerment to do that.
yeah.
And one of the classic is like, I think I really get your position here. I think we're going to agree to disagree. And I think that's okay. Let's just on this level agree to disagree. And especially if you can get a statement of credibility, I kind of see this is really important to you. And I can really tell that. And it's really important to me. So we both feel passionately. If you can find any commonality, we may differ on gun control and how that happens or whether we should do it. But you know what? I know we both want our kids to be safe in school. We just really differ how that happens. So let's agree to disagree. And then it allows the relationship to stand. And you can see that person's humanness who is saying, I feel so upset about this, but you can connect to what you know is common between the two of you, which is an important reminder. It's so easy to forget.
So I can tell for myself, like when you say, we just, wait, what did you just say?
We agree to disagree.
Agree to disagree. If you just say that, for some reason, I like want to.
Yeah, your blue comes out. You're ready to fight me.
Well, it's more
No,
of
I
like,
get it,
but when you say like, I think,
yeah,
right. I think that we both want this thing.
right.
It's easier for, like we both want whatever it is. We
both care about this because that's
we
what
both care about this.
yeah.
We're both trying to do this same thing. We both want civic engagement. We both, whatever it is. So just for whatever it's worth, it's like, there's something about the joining, or even if you were to say, I totally see I see your point and I see how that you've got there. I see it differently.
I see it differently, but
I see it differently,
where you come from.
But you're not crazy, or something.
That's really a small important element, but like a lot of
big element.
Well,
it's brilliant.
But a lot of he's so brilliant. But it's a lot of the time that the activation, if you really know what the activation is about, it's like, I'm not stupid. I'm not mean. I'm not selfish. I mean, I'm not a bad person. Yeah, we're arguing. If somebody's really intensely with us, they're trying to say, I'm not a bad person. I'm a good person. And that's often really the crux of why we get. And if
that's what you mean by statements of credibility.
Yeah. I see you. You love children too. You don't want them hurt.
Right.
You would never want a child to be hurt in school, even though we disagree about whether we should restrict guns. And that allows, it's an important way to allow face saving too. Like you're right. If I just said, let's just agree to disagree.
Oh yeah, that doesn't sit well.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Uncle Bob might not like that. I might not like that. No, you're right.
No, honestly, I just said, we just disagree.
Yeah. That doesn't ever go well.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the whole thing with blue, right? It is that it's like the Excel spreadsheet, we're going to get together because families are supposed to get together. We're going to have the, turkey or whatever. So, but then it feels bad if you're in touch with the longing of wanting what we're talking, kind of the contact and the closeness. But also sometimes what I would recommend is like doing a little test balloon. so that like maybe there's a cousin or a sibling or someone else that's also lonely or like yearning, but isn't able to express that. So a little test balloon would be just testing, right? Just touching and seeing if there's anybody there, you know what I mean? And sometimes just that shakes it up a little bit. And then there's a little bit of, but if there's not, if you really, and there's really not, and if it's depleting and if it's not good for you, it might be that the consequence of people not being able to do that is that they lose you, or maybe they lose you every other year, or I mean, there really is, when we stay in our really defended blue space, there are relational consequences to that. But what I just always want to, like, sometimes people don't know that. And so one of the things we do talk about is like, I would rather, if I'm in my zipped up place, I would beg people to poke and to say, Sue, you're doing this. I want more from you before they leave. So that would be just the test balloon idea, is just to make sure that there's not somebody right there that is just doing it because everybody else is doing it. Now, and a thought that I wanted to tell y'all a little bit. Can I shift?
I was going to shift I was going to say one other thing,
Yeah.
and that is, when you come from, what you're saying is that there's a whole family of blue and you're so used to that. I think one of the hardest things about being brought up in a family of blue is how much we internalize it when we're in a really young stage, with it being about us, and and it's unconscious, but you start to feel it's about you. And so part of the reminder, I love that, like you said, the touchstones, and like really seeing them as that this is their defenses and that they're so blocked off, and being able to see it so that you really stroke you to say, I'm so glad that I have opened myself up, and allow yourself not to take it as, like, to remind yourself that it is not a rejection of you. It is their defensive cutoff that they don't know how to get beyond, or they're not able to. So I just think sometimes we have to really take that as like a compassionate, like, oh my gosh, this is why I disappeared. I think it's like to have an adult reminder that your little young self saw this disconnection as about, is sometimes a really helpful reminder, I guess.
We wanted to tell you all, first of all, Catherine, can you wave? And then Laura, can you wave? So these are folks that you may have had some contact with, back channel. They are some of the folks that help us. They're wonderful. You can reach them at any time. It's Catherine at TU, Therapist Uncensored, or Laura, LARA, at Therapist Uncensored. Laura in particular, you might want to tune into, related to this, because she's come on board specifically to cultivate community. So this event, Catherine and her together for sure, but Laura's specific role is to really help us kind of walk the walk, which is creating real community. So anybody that is interested in kind of helping shepherd that, we don't want to just create things just to make things up, but we're kind of in a period of listening to what people are interested in. So Laura is in a process of anybody who wants to schedule a short meeting, and just so that she can hear what's on your mind and things that might be helpful. There's also some initiatives that we're thinking about that we can share with you in more detail and get your feedback about if those things would be helpful. Some of those, just to mention, just to give you some ideas. One is, you may have seen, there's a reading pod on awe, the science of awe, that is just about to start. They chose that for the next one for the holidays because it is so good. And it is so hopeful. And if you haven't heard that particular podcast, it's one of our favorites. We loved it. It's Dr. Keltner. Fantastic. It's science-based, but it's spiritual, it's hopeful, it's so good. So the idea behind the reading pod is that a small group gets together, meets about 6 times
once a week
or once every other week, reads, in portions, and discusses it. But it's also a great way to build relationships with the other members. A lot of times these groups they bond, and at least some of them, then you pick another book and you read. That doesn't always happen, but so that's a thing that is happening. And if you're interested in things like that and you don't want to do awe, then we do it on all kinds of different books. So that's something that's happening. Another thing that's happening, and this is our super exciting news that we have not publicly announced yet, but we are doing a live weekend coming in May. And yeah, we're super excited. It's an all-day clinical conference on May 4th in Austin, Texas. We are gonna, if anybody's gonna be flying in for it, people have asked before, it's like, we did meetups at one point, and we were like, no, this is not the event. Don't come in because it's not enough. But this would be the event, because we're gonna create stuff for the people that come in town, like make sure that you're welcome, and there's little activities and things like that. There's a book launch party Friday night. There's an all-day conference Saturday. We'll do something Sunday. We'll have things to do, and also a way again of building community for those of you that want to come in town. If you're interested in that, and Austin is a blast. And so if you're interested in that, and it might be random and maybe nobody is, but if you happen to be, there's a link that Catherine's going to put in the chat to pre-register. All it means, there's no obligation. All it means is just sign up, and then as soon as the registration opens, you'll get a notice. You don't have to be a therapist. Everything that we do, we want to be really inclusive. The all-day conference is geared towards therapists, but there's going to be a lot of things, like I said, around it, and you're welcome to come to usually people that are at this level, even if you're not a therapist, you're very smart and interested and lifelong learner, and you're welcome to come. So,
and it's focused on secure relating and attachment and neurobiology. How they go together, things like that.
That's right. So that's exciting. And what else? And then and then also in the book launch, we are going to be doing a little bit of traveling. So if in your community you have a group, like a therapist group, that would be interested, it's possible that if there's enough of a group there, that we could come and do a small event, do something around the book launch. So you could contact us about that. We did that meetup, and it was amazing. It was so fun all over, in over a dozen countries. We had little small groups. Some of them were super tiny. This is part of why we're hesitant to do it again, because we don't want to leave anybody hanging. But so that's kind of a exciting thing. No pressure, obviously, but if since people are kind of scattered all over, if you happen to have a community and you guys get the energy, and we could be seduced. And do reach out to Laura at therapistsuncensored.com if you would like to follow up and be part of any of this, of like cultivating stuff, because we are interested in that now that the book is done. And pitch for the book if you are interested in pre-ordering. We will be, of course, doing stuff around, some reading and stuff for that once it comes. That'll be a little while, but
did we miss anybody else?
securelatingbook.com would be how you could pre-order that.
Did we miss anybody else that y'all had raised your hand and we didn't get to raise?
All right. Well, thank you guys. And we look forward to hear any feedback about this is helpful. And we will hopefully see you again in whatever format. So thank you. Thank you for listening, and thank you for coming.
Thanks for joining us. Bye.